The 8th of May 1945. Nazi Germany is defeated and the war in Europe comes to an end. With that, millions of German soldiers and civilians are left wondering what was to become of them. Were they to be punished? What did their futures hold? In this video, we are going to give you an insight into what happened after the war to these men and women and how it has shaped modern Germany. Following the conclusion of World War II, a significant number of German citizens and prisoners of war were forced to work for the victorious Allies. The concept of utilizing Germany's citizens and soldiers for forced labor as a means of reparations was first proposed during the Tehran Conference in 1943, where Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin advocated for the conscription of 4 million German laborers. The fate of German prisoners of war drastically shifted depending on where they were held captive. In the West, prisoners held by the United States and Great Britain were treated relatively well. They worked as laborers and were often paid for their work. However, some prisoners held in France were made to work in unfavorable conditions as a form of reparation for the damage inflicted by the war. In contrast to the West, the situation was far grimmer in the East. German prisoners held by the Soviet Union were used as forced labor in the reconstruction of the war-torn country. The harsh living conditions, coupled with overwork and malnutrition, led to a high death rate among these prisoners. The Soviet Union considered the forced labor of Germans as part of Germany's war reparations for the atrocities committed under Nazi Germany. Therefore, German civilians from both Germany and Eastern Europe were forcefully relocated to the Soviet Union and compelled to work. Additionally, ethnic Germans residing in the Soviet Union were exiled during the war and enlisted for forced labor. Between 1941 and 1956, approximately 2.8 million Germans were held captive in the Soviet Union, enduring extreme and often inhumane conditions. Their days were filled with grueling tasks and back-breaking labor, forced upon them to rebuild the war-ravaged Soviet Union. From dawn until dusk, they toiled under the harshest weather conditions, facing bitter cold winters and scorching summers, with little respite or reprieve. This forced labor system bore a chilling resemblance to the infamous Gulag system of Soviet forced labor camps. The prisoners, stripped of their freedom and dignity, were subjected to unimaginable hardships, both physical and psychological. They were deprived of basic necessities, living in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, often lacking adequate food, clothing, and medical care. The toll on their physical and mental well-being was immense, and they endured not only the grueling labor, but also the constant fear, uncertainty, and despair that came with their indefinite captivity. Tragically, the death toll among these prisoners was devastatingly high, with estimates suggesting that up to 1 million may have perished during their captivity. Many succumbed to illness, malnutrition, or exhaustion, while other victims fell to the harsh punishments and brutality inflicted upon them by their captors. In this grim reality, the Geneva Convention, which was meant to protect the rights and well-being of prisoners of war, was shamelessly ignored. Despite the harrowing fates of prisoners in the Soviet Union, the story was somewhat different for German soldiers detained in the United States. From 1942 to 1946, an astounding number of over 425,000 German POWs found themselves held across 700 camps in 46 states. The prisoners in the hands of the US were treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention, which guaranteed them decent food, clothing, housing, and medical care. However, their experience went beyond mere survival. They were given opportunities to work, engage in recreational activities, and pursue educational endeavors. Tens of thousands of these prisoners were employed in various sectors such as agriculture, milling, and canning across the United States. They received a daily compensation of 80 cents for their labor, which equates to approximately $14 in 2023. This starkly contrasted with the harsh conditions that many prisoners faced in Eastern and Western Europe. The presence of German prisoners also had a transformative effect on American society. The interactions between the prisoners and the local population fostered a cultural exchange that enriched both sides. Americans had the chance to immerse themselves in German life, language, and traditions, while the prisoners gained insight into American values such as democracy and freedom. These interactions played a significant role in shaping post-war Germany. Even though they expected to go home right after the war in 1945, quite a few German prisoners ended up working in the United States until 1946. This might have gone against the Geneva Convention's rule of fast repatriation. After that, they spent 3 more years as laborers in France and the United Kingdom. It's surprising that most German prisoners left the US with a positive view of their captors. They earned quite a bit of money, which helped Germany's economy after the war. After going back home, around 5,000 Germans chose to emigrate to the United States, and many of them even returned for visits later on. By the time September 1946 rolled around, a staggering 402,000 German captives languished in various POW camps dispersed throughout Britain. Their days were filled with menial tasks such as repairing roads and manufacturing bricks. It was these very prisoners who were tasked with making significant contributions to building Wembley Way for the forthcoming 1948 Olympics. As the spring of 1947 dawned, a considerable majority, approximately 170,000, were sent to work in the agricultural sector, aiding the local farmers with the all-important task of the harvest. Despite international law mandating the return of POWs following the signing of a peace treaty, the fact that Germany was under occupation made the prospect of such a treaty unlikely. Consequently, Britain retained its German prisoners, who were valuable as a labor force without specifying a potential repatriation date. Also, the logistical challenge of organizing transport further complicated matters. Moreover, the thought of sending back hardcore Nazis among the prisoners was deemed unwise. The British public expressed negative sentiment through their correspondence with the press. The prolonged detainment of prisoners tarnished Britain's reputation as it contradicted the very liberties the war aimed to protect. This treatment of the defeated was similar to the cruelty expected from the Nazis had they won. Even convicts, despite their crimes, were guaranteed the duration of their confinement, a certainty denied to the German POWs. In August 1946, a collective voice of frustration emerged as people rallied together through an advocacy group known as Save Europe Now. Through this group, they voiced their concerns to the then Prime Minister Clement Attlee via a petition. Responding swiftly, Attlee announced a monthly repatriation plan for 15,000 prisoners of war. This news was celebrated, although there were still some who questioned the pace of the process. Ultimately, the repatriation efforts concluded in 1948, bringing closure to the chapter. During the war, Nazi Germany had seized control of France and required a significant number of French citizens, nearly 650,000, to work across the border in Germany, where their primary interaction with their German occupiers was through farm work. However, the tables turned conspicuously in 1945 as France's administration engaged the maximum number of German prisoners of war in the reconstruction efforts of their country. This was in contrast from the aftermath of World War I, where France principally sought financial compensation from Germany. French officials had initially anticipated the cooperation of more than 2 million former German military personnel, but eventually they had to settle for half this number. Notably, 70% of these individuals were from POW camps managed by the United States. In a bid to reclaim its status among the world's leading powers, France found itself struggling to address its internal problems. The vast number of prisoners of war added to its population caused an acute shortage of food and clothing. The situation was so dire that it resulted in the death of an estimated 40,000 former German soldiers, while others succumbed to the hazardous work of mining and landmine clearance, a deadly legacy of Germany's Wehrmacht in France. However, for some German POWs, life in France was more favorable than in their devastated homeland. This was particularly true for the former German soldiers employed in the agricultural sector. These men were given more substantial rations and had regular interaction with the locals. Living conditions in the camps also saw significant improvements. The transition of control from military to civil authorities gave the POWs new liberties. This change particularly benefited those in officers' camps, where educational opportunities were now accessible. Despite the Geneva Convention's mandate for the swift repatriation of prisoners of war, the German soldiers held captive in France saw no immediate prospect of freedom. The situation began to evolve when the United States, anticipating the need for Western Germany's support in the imminent Cold War against the Soviet Union, applied significant pressure. As a result, French authorities announced in 1947 that all remaining German POWs could anticipate returning home by the end of the following year. However, French authorities were reluctant to entirely forfeit their source of inexpensive labor. Consequently, they extended an offer to the former German soldiers to remain in France as paid workers. Consequently, approximately 137,000 individuals, a large number being from Eastern Germany, were granted the status of civilian workers. In the 1950s, there were still around 30,000 to 40,000 former German soldiers living there. Many of them had families with dual nationalities and were raising children. The stories of these prisoners of war are a somber reminder of the harsh realities of conflict and the often overlooked human toll that remains even after peace has been declared. Their unwavering strength, shown through the toughest conditions and endless challenges, highlights the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Their experience makes us reflect on the true cost of war and inspires us to strive for a future where such suffering is never repeated. Well, that's it. We hope you enjoyed our video. Please leave a comment down below with your thoughts and don't forget to like it. Subscribe to the channel as an offering to the gods of the algorithm, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.